Will Rogers has announced that he will be returning to Washington.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. You can check out all our written work in their respective locations. Locked On Huskies is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. And just a reminder that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get 150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Lars, we had a lot to talk about today. We decided we're only going to do two little mini segments as they'll be. And the first one is because so many people are returning to Washington. We've seen 4 big time announcements now over the last day and a half or so. And I'm sure they're going to continue to roll in the second we hit stop recording, which is going to be wonderful, as the Will Rogers one did. So let's start with Will Rogers, because now Washington has 2 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster, and this is just a huge reacquisition, you can call it, for Washington and Jedd Fisch.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of ironic that the news broke after our last podcast, because we basically laid out the reason why Will Rogers would be staying, right? Was the fact that you get your future right in Demond Williams, and that's a good win for Jedd Fisch to do that publicly first, right? Because as a recruiter moving forward with the program, you want to be able to have a guy, hey, this is the guy I want for the next 3 years, right? But that key being there's 3 years, you need 1 extra year this coming year. You don't want to necessarily have to throw Demond Williams, although he might be electric and might be, fantastic, right?
Sure.
But if you have the option of one of the all-time passing quarterbacks in college football, you take that guy if you can get him. And I think once Austin Mack, as we said, went to Alabama, it kind of seemed like where else would Will Rogers go? Not that nobody didn't want him, not that he couldn't find another school, but he just kind of got put in the bad spot of, well, now my other coach left. They've got their quarterbacks. New coach came in. He doesn't really have a quarterback. I could go try and bet on myself, but if you end up at, no disrespect, Southern Miss or, Alabama State, it's like, why would you go try and do that just to find a new spot versus try and make it work? But again, that's why you bring in an offensive-minded coach in Fisch, so you don't have a rough transition with the mass exodus of guys leaving to the NFL. You don't want to have a culture change, just kind of flip 180 back to defense. So that's why I think it was always kind of almost locked that Will Rogers would stay. It was a good sign that he was attended the first team meeting, attended the second and third team meetings that they've had subsequently. And so it kind of was more or less going to be a surprise if Will Rogers didn't, but it's still a massive win for Washington, because now you don't necessarily have to, as I said, throw Demond Williams in the fire right away. He could still win the job, and Will Rogers played 6 games last year, so it's not a shoo-in that he'll start every single game. But you want that kind of balance when you're going into spring camp. You're going to have 2 quarterbacks versus, okay, we got one, maybe we got, because you really want at least 3 or 4, right? Just to keep, as we said, keep almost the same thing with Michael Penix, where you give Austin Mack a couple of days in fall camp just so he doesn't burn out his shoulder by mid-September.
Right. And so I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was kind of what I wanted to hit on, is that this won't be the last quarterback we see commit to Washington for the year 2024. Yesterday we talked about Dash Beerley, who's going to be part of the class of 2025, and how he might not be the only 2025 quarterback we see commit, but we might see a junior college guy. We might see just another transfer guy that decides to enter the transfer portal in April at some point. But stocking up the quarterback position is never a bad thing to do, and getting an experienced guy like Will Rogers will help out Demond Williams. Where somebody texted me the other day, it was last night at this point, after the Will Rogers commitment went down, and they asked me, well, does this mean that Demond Williams might, reopen his recruitment at this point? And I said, no, that's not going to be what this is, because he was preparing to go sit behind Noah Fafita. He was already prepared for that reality at Arizona. So yeah, winning the job as a true freshman would have been really great for him, but this was the reality that he was already prepared for. So there's no reason to worry about that. And then bringing in other guys, no matter who it might be, it's still going to give him an opportunity to win the job in 2025 and beyond, where you can kind of pencil in Will Rogers as the 2024 quarterback, barring an injury or barring something else happening. So I feel like this is a really great way to just kind of not only say, all right, we're going to solidify the quarterback position, but just get one of these veteran recruiters in the room where it's, all right, hey, now, and we're going to talk about this more later on the show, Gearin, Lane, and Hatchett. Come on, come jump out of the portal. Now you've got your quarterback back. It would be really great to have some more pieces on the offensive line, which is, I feel like that's, and we could talk about a guy like Gard Memolar too, where he's not in the portal, but that's another just veteran offensive lineman who's going to be a big part of this line, because we need to talk about Drew Azzopardi, who right before we press record is somebody who also announced that he's going to be staying at Washington. And this is big, where you guys can go, all the everydayers out there can go check out our show from a couple of weeks ago, where we talked about how big of an acquisition he is. And we were thinking about a very different offensive line, a very different just Husky team at that point. But what Drew Azzopardi means to this team just became way more important. And him deciding to not re-enter the transfer portal and stick around at Washington is really, really important.
Right, exactly. Because although when he's committed and signed with Washington, it was okay. Well, maybe Roger Rosengarten kicks over to left tackle and Drew slides in right at right tackle, or worst comes to worst, Drew just slides in at right tackle and you start Jalen Clem. But you can also move Drew as a party over to left tackle. And I think with both Roger and Troy being gone, and a new coaching staff and all that, it kind of allows Drew a chance to say, hey, you know what, I can come in and be the left tackle. I can come in and kind of just with a fresh start with a couple of years of eligibility. With, again, and this is where you bring in Brendan Carroll as an offensive line coach, I think makes a huge difference, right? Because with Scott Huff leaving, if you just bring in a quarterback and Jimmy Doherty and stuff like that, but you don't bring in a kind of a truly established, strong name as an offensive line coach, then you're kind of hoping for, hey, well, maybe you don't have any other chances, or maybe you'd have to go find someplace else and it might be a little harder. And you kind of have to play the negative angle more than, hey, we want you to be our LT1, or we want you to be our OT1 or O-line 1, right? Now that Parker Burles are gone, you can make the case if Landon Hatchett doesn't come back that Drew Azzopardi is O-line 1, no matter where he plays. Sure. So I think getting him in the bow and the combination of him and Will Rogers, you would have to imagine those guys are two guys who are coming in as forward transfers, now reestablished transfers. No matter where Drew plays, he's going to be a key cog. And I think with that departure, as I mentioned with Rosengarten, it kind of just opens, and this wouldn't be a shot at Huff, but just I think bringing in a new face, maybe Brendan Carroll sees, actually, you know what, you'd be better on the left side, even though you could have played right tackle regardless if Rosengarten stayed or not. I think Brendan Carroll might kind of view him in a different light than Scott Huff did. Not that Scott Huff viewed him in a bad light. I just think kind of having a fresh set of eyes might also help, and that's why Drew stuck around.
No, that's absolutely right. And then it's just kind of that same thing of, all right, do I want to go through this process again? Where I just went through it a month ago, and as you and I were saying right before the show started, that two of his top options before he decided to commit to Washington were Arizona and UCLA, where it seemed like he wanted to stay on the West Coast. And then talk about Arizona, where Jedd Fisch and Brendan Carroll used to be, that it all makes sense that he wanted to stick around and wanted to see it out with the staff, where he's one of those guys who hadn't really said anything on social media or really anywhere after his commitment, after the staff change, after everything, which kind of felt like a good sign, where it didn't feel like, there was any rumors of, oh, Drew Azzopardi might be going somewhere else, where now he's a really great piece you can build around, where he's coming into his redshirt sophomore season in 2024. So he's got a couple of years of eligibility remaining. And this is the kind of guy where you can stick him at left tackle, you can stick him at right tackle, and just say, all right, we're going to build the offensive line around you for the next couple of seasons. And Lars, these are some really great offensive pieces, and we already knew that the offense was going to need a major rebuild after Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, Rome Odunze, Michael Penix, Dylan Johnson all left for the draft, along with the offensive linemen. But the defense is where we had a lot of questions, and we've seen some key returners on that side of the ball too. But first, we're going to send a message to our good friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got HBCU covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So let's flip over to the defensive side, and let's start with Sebastian Valdez, because we saw, and like we can talk probably a little bit about Cameron Fabicchio on it as well, but Sebastian Valdez is the biggest piece right now that we've seen on the defensive side announce that he'll be staying at Washington. That's no slight to Camp Fab or anybody else, but Washington is really, really thin along the defensive line. We knew they were going to be thin coming into the year. That's why we saw Kalen DeBoer's staff go out and get 5 high school commits along the defensive front. That's why we saw them go out and get BJ Green and Sebastian Valdez. And Valdez deciding to stay strong on his commitment to Washington is, I feel like it might even be bigger than some of the ones we've seen on the offensive side of the ball recently. Because let's just run through it real fast. Braylon Trice and Zion Tupuola-Fatui, the edge rushers, are gone. And then we look on the interior, not only are Tuli Asanoa and MJ Ale gone, but then so is Fatui Tuitele, who decided to medically retire. So right there, that's what, 80% of the snaps that we saw be taken up front this season. Like, that's a really significant portion of just the defensive front right there. So getting a guy like Sebastian Valdez, who's rated as a 247 as a 4-star transfer, to slide right in, can wreak some havoc in the middle, be a better pass rusher than we saw from some of the defensive tackles just over the last couple of seasons. This is a huge win for the staff.
Exactly. And I mean, going into the Big Ten, that's one thing you needed was bodies on both sides of the line, right? Offensive and defensive line. And especially, I mean, imagine if you had Sebastian Valdez in the national championship game. I think, again, maybe Michigan still probably wins that game, but just he's a force up the middle. I think that's one thing that stood out when we first started talking about him, was he's not just a big body that you just kind of plug as a B-gap guy and hope to stop the run and kind of just be a run stuffer, but doesn't really move the pocket. He really can actually push the pocket. I think that's one thing that Sebastian doesn't get a lot of credit for. So no matter what type of defensive scheme they want you run, you now have a big veteran body to lean on with 3-4 years of experience, granted at Montana State, but plenty of production, plenty of talent. And now it's just kind of like we've seen plenty of experience of examples of guys where you're playing at a lower level and then you finally get that kind of call up to the major leagues, if you will, right? And sure. And now now all that success you had, and like, oh well, he's a Big Sky guy. How do we know that's going to translate to the Big Ten? Well, sometimes you just kind of see the type and production, and you just know with at least quality coaching, you can get a lot more out of him. And I think that's exactly what Valdez is going to be at Washington, where a guy that can just help Armand and Javon Parker come along, help maybe some of the other defensive linemen in general, right? But I think like Omar Khan when he gets on campus and things like that. But having that truly veteran presence at each part of the defense, the front 7 or the front 4 linebackers, and then the back end, like you mentioned Camp Fab, right? You want that veteran presence on the back end as well, but you have to have that in all 3 position groups. And I think that is another part that Sebastian's going to bring, is just kind of having that true, almost like what Jawar Muhammad was for the cornerbacks this year, where it's like just bringing a guy with veteran experience that can really lead that group. And again, now when you have a great coach in Jason Kafusi, now it's just you're pairing great with great versus what they had in the secondary last season.
No, I agree. Where it's to add on to the Jabbar point there, where it's when you saw Jabbar on one side of the field, it was okay. Don't really need to worry about what's going on over there because you trust him to do his job and to just be a lockdown corner. And you can almost say the same thing about Valdez in the middle, where it's you watch the tape and you see somebody who can wreak havoc, who can rush the passer, who can stop the run and just do a really good job all around. The biggest question is, all right, well, how much are we going to lean on him this year? Where to use the Jabbar example, we saw a lot thrown at him where it was, all right, you're going to go shadow this guy. You're going to go shadow that guy. And he did a really great job of that all season long. So the question in the middle being, okay, and because we can look at some of the younger edge rushers that I know you and I are excited about. We can talk about Zach Durfee, Lance Holtzclaw, Maurice Himes, some of these other guys that are up and coming. Like, we'll see what happens with guys like Noah Carter and Keona Wilhite. But when we look at some of these younger edge rushers with a really high ceiling, you kind of look at them and say, all right, well, what kind of steps are these guys going to take this season? and how much pressure can somebody like Sebastian Valdez up the middle take off of them. And that's, maybe along with that, you see him help out some of the other guys in the room, the Armand and Javon Parkers of the world, and just kind of say, all right, he can be that Jabbar Muhammad in another sense of, here's another veteran guy with experience that played at a very high level while he was in the Big Sky, and he can probably teach some of these other guys a thing or two as well.
Right, exactly. And I think, that it's just there, but you can't teach experience, right? You can use your experience and kind of give that to the younger guys, but that's just something you flat out can't teach. So when you get a body like Sebastian, an experienced body that you almost don't have to invest as much of your coaching in, and he can become an assistant coach, if you will, right? I think that's something to where you can't replace that either. And so I think all those kind of coming together, that'll really help Washington. Because again, when you look at the Big Ten next year, there's a lot of good running teams that's, in the Big Ten next year. So I think having just kind of a presence to where you don't feel as vulnerable up the middle as you did, maybe even this season, right? Because, we knew what Tua Taylor and MJ and all those guys were, but none of them really grew, right? Like they got a little bit better, but none of them truly grew. Where now you have a top end guy with 1 year left and a bunch of younger guys like, hey, I'm going to set the bar here. Now you guys can help, kind of get up to my level with each game and with each season. So I think that's also kind of just a good cultural fit as well.
No, I agree. And so let's talk about the other one who did decide to return. So we talked about some of the other younger guys in the room, Khmori House, where you and I discussed him a little bit on one of our shows the other day, saying, oh, he entered the transfer portal, just to continue with the freshman exodus, where a lot of these guys who committed to Kalen DeBoer's staff wanted to take a step back and wanted to look around. And he's the first one where it didn't take him very long. And he said, all right, I'm coming back. Let's do this. And curiously enough, and Washington doesn't have a linebackers coach yet, which might also be part of that. But he tagged John Richardson, the secondary coach, in his tweet, where is it something where maybe we'll see him play safety? He definitely has the body type to play either safety or linebacker. And personally, I think he'd fit better as a linebacker. But, you can kind of see it going either way there. And I just think that this is a really big one because I know you and I both really like his film. We really like his closing speed and what he can do from an inside linebacker position. And just kind of seeing one of those guys say, all right, no, I trust Jedd Fisch. I trust the staff. I'm going to jump back in the boat here. And, maybe we see a ripple effect there where Paki Finau, Peyton Waters, maybe even Josh Lair, some of these other guys who have decided to decommit or enter the transfer portal and just look elsewhere, maybe say, okay, some of these other guys in my same class are deciding to just kind of see this through. So let me jump back in the boat. Let me see if I can do the same.
Right, exactly. And I think especially on defense, first of all, they also don't even have a defensive coordinator, right? Like not only do I not have a linebackers coach, you have a defensive coordinator, at least publicly. God, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So again, that's kind of where the defense does take a little bit of a hit there. That's why Lair, all those guys kind of can say, hey, well, how are you going to use me? Like I can like John Richardson, but unless you're going to make him your defensive coordinator, which I don't think that would be a good idea. You kind of almost let him grow into a defensive coordinator down the road. You don't want to make that forced hire. But I do think, to your point, with all of these guys, and going back to Khmori at linebacker, just look at the depth of the room. There's no reason why Khmori couldn't play this year and play all 13, 14, 15 games, however many they play. Because, you have Carson Bruner, right? You have Alfonso Tubertala, Devon Bryan, and Jordan Whitney. But beyond that, are there any guys in that room that think, wow, he's going to prevent Khmori from playing? Like, there's nobody on the roster at that
There are
position.
literally no other scholarship players at that position.
Right, exactly. And even the walk-ons have transferred out. So, the fact
Drew
that
Fowler's still around.
Right, exactly. So Austin Hardno transferred out, and I think somebody else did as well. But the point being, to your point, that there's so many limited bodies at that spot. Khmori, at least if anything, could come in for a year or two, and then if he wants to transfer to a USC or some Texas comes calling in a couple of years or whatever, so be it. But at least you give it a couple of years, probably be all Big Ten freshmen. Washington kind of gave him the best opportunity to maximize what he can be as a freshman. So I think he made the right decision.
No, I agree with you there. And then let's take a step back here because it's great to see all these key pieces returning, but there's still a whole lot of movement that needs to happen on this roster before, you can feel good about even going into spring ball. So let's start with Tacario Davis here as we kind of switch gears from guys who have returned to guys that we'd like to see either take their name out of the transfer portal or commit to Washington for multiple different reasons, where mainly it would be just fit, opportunity to get some extra playing time, whatever it might be. Let's start with Tacario Davis, where he entered the transfer portal. It sounds like he was on the big visit group that came up to Washington last weekend. He goes back down to Arizona, takes his name out of the transfer portal, then puts his name back into the transfer portal, and this time with a do not contact designation, which signals that he probably already has a destination in mind. And it feels like Washington would probably end up being the front runner for him there. And this would just be a massive get for the secondary.
Exactly. I mean, I think that it's the second time around and it's the no contact designation, which I know people are now saying, oh, that's the tampering designation. It's like, okay, well, if you're not tampering, you're not trying. So with that being said, let's call a spade here. But
sure.
But to your point, whether you get Price Stock or not, you have to get Davis, right? Because when you just look at Arizona's defense last season, as without question the number one cornerback that they had last year. Again, Price Stock was good, right? You're not to undervalue him, because ideally you want both of those guys, right? But if you had to pick one or the other, I'm taking Tacario Davis. So I think that's kind of where maybe he initially thought, oh, well, let's wait and see who the defensive coordinator hire is, or let me kind of sort out if maybe I can get some NIL at Arizona or whatever the case may be. But I do think after both schools made their hire, and whatever the case, whoever Washington's defensive coordinator ends up being, like Jedd Fisch is either hitting a home run, or I'm really curious what the legalese is around that. I mean, I know Pete Carroll's taking a look at the Chargers.
Somebody on the NFL side.
Oh, I was going to say, I know Pete Carroll wants to get a run at the Chargers job that Jim Harbaugh almost has a shoe in for. So maybe Pete's just trying to play both sides of the coin there. But with that being said, regardless of he's the actual DC or not, I just wanted to put that out there. But with that being said, I think once you kind of get through that first weekend, maybe Jedd Fisch is like, okay, now I know who my coordinator. I just can't hire. I can't announce the hire, but I can kind of tell you who it's going to be, or maybe have a better idea. That's when Davis would say, okay, actually, you know what? Second thought, let me get back up to Washington. And when you look at Washington's cornerback room, Devon Banks is coming back, which he was hurt last year, but that's a good piece to have coming back. Elijah Jackson has eligibility. Thaddeus Dixon has eligibility. Correct me if I'm wrong. Those three guys have not entered the portal. Hopefully not.
Correct.
At least not yet. But and to kind of usher on that point, if you haven't entered the portal at this point on either side, it's kind of hard pressed to, because you get 30 days. But if you're going to wait till that last weekend in the portal to say, oh, hey, I have 2 more days. Let me hit the portal now. Right. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So that's why these first couple weeks, and again, it's I think it's fair on Tacario to come up for that visit, but not commit and kind of just truly weigh it out. Whereas you saw Fafita and McMillan didn't even consider. They didn't even make that trip. So I think on defense, that's kind of where the help is needed more. So letting those guys take their time to make the right decision, I think, was the right call for Jedd. And again, Tacario has not announced for Washington. Maybe he has, and I'm not on Twitter at this moment in time. But
he hasn't as of 3:19 p.m. on Wednesday.
Okay, good. I was because there's so many times where we're recording the show and I'm trying to not look at my phone, and then we, click and record. We record, and we go, oh, 3 more guys decided to come back. But Tacario kind of just, with John Richardson being here, it just kind of seems like an almost shoo-in that he would end up in Washington.
No, I agree with you there, where it seems like that's kind of where he would end up going, where he can step in and fill that Jabbar Muhammad role. And then the guys you didn't mention are guys that we're all really excited about. Curly Reed, Leroy Bryant, Caleb Presley, where that trio of guys too can now, maybe they don't necessarily play a lot this year. They can go into this year comfortable knowing, like, all right, we got 1 more year to develop. Maybe we'll see some time here and some time there. And then, assuming, let's say, Tacario and Prysock both do decide to come to Washington, where both those guys end up here, and then they're probably off to the NFL draft after this season, and that trio of young guys can take over. And that's something where that's an exciting thing to think about, where it's, this is the reason that they came here. Maybe it took a little bit longer than they expected to get on the field, but they're doing exactly what they came to Washington to do. Just take over, start in the secondary. And that's a really good combination there, where you can stick either Leroy Bryant or Caleb Presley on the outside, throw the other one on the nickel, with Curly Reed on the other boundary. And that's a really nice trio of guys. And getting Takario and Prysock to kind of help them out for one more season would be just really, really big for their development.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the key, is because this isn't just a one-off. And with everybody questioning, oh, hey, is Jedd going to actually stay at Washington is he going to be at Washington by next season? Having this long-term plan at least, gives credence to he is thinking about it. He is making sure that he's building for the long haul and not just getting, 7 or 8, grad transfers and saying, hey, I'm just going to load up this year, kind of like what Kalen DeBoer did, and, call that even, right? Where I want to actually build for the long haul. I know I have a bunch of guys that are able to, kind of have multiple years of eligibility after this season. But in order to just not throw those guys in the fire, a la Javion Green as a freshman, let's kind of build them up so that they don't get shell shocked. And who better to learn from than Prysock and Davis if you're Curly Reed, Leroy Bryant, or any of those guys, or Caleb Presley?
Right. No, I agree with you there. And then because I feel like we need to just kind of switch gears here from just the defense back to the offensive line, because right now that's probably the number one need. Where Guerin and Landon Hatchett are probably the two biggest names, where we've seen Nick Caleppo announce on Twitter that he's probably going to be going elsewhere. We haven't heard anything from Julius Buelow, but I know he's got a visit set up with Ole Miss that was publicized the other day, and that would be a nice one to get back, but it seems like he might be interested in pursuing some of that for his final year of college football. So it's kind of on the Hatchets to, if they want to come back, they would be going a long way towards building the offensive line, where, you still might have to start some young guys. You're still going to have to wait and see what the April transfer portal period looks like, but getting those two guys back might be the biggest win out there in terms of the current roster, outside of, any freshman guys, where it's probably Noah Carter when it just in terms of like name value, but then right below them is both Hatchets. We're getting those guys back who both have experience along the offensive line now would be really, really important for 2024.
Right. And I was taking a look at the current guys who are in the portal that are offensive linemen who haven't committed, just because there's a decent amount of talent already in that kind of, system. But then when you add to it, okay, because correct me if I'm wrong, but they can't take those guys out of the portal. They can only take new guys.
And
in terms of school. Well, so like Ethan Bark so the only reason I'm saying this is I'm looking at guys from Nevada, Louisville, Marshall, guys, offensive linemen that are in the portal that maybe could be a target to Washington. Those guys can't come to Washington right now because they weren't a part of the coaching change, right? Like, does that, or if you're in the portal at any point when it's open, you can get it.
I believe if you're in the portal at any point it's open, that you're allowed to still go elsewhere. It's once it closes, I don't believe you have to commit by the time it closes, but yeah, it's the portal is changing every day. So it probably changed in the time that it took us to say this.
Well, because the only reason I say that is because when you're going through and taking a look at some of the bodies that are in the transfer portal along the offensive line, there's plenty of Power 5 guys that the reason why I'm saying that is, do you go and get them now, or can you get them before the spring? Because the portal doesn't open up again until April, right? So Can you go in now and get those guys now, or do you have to wait for those guys until March or April? Because that means that there's going to be a lot of other additions because you can't go into spring camp with 70 guys on your roster. That's just asking for disaster.
So I hear what you're saying there, and if those are the two options in front of me, if I were Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff, I honestly might wait till April. Where if you can just find a way to get through spring ball, because let's think about it this way. And I don't mean any disrespect when I say this, but look at the way Aaron Dumas' time at Washington turned out. The running back who was here in 2022, where it's, oh yeah, this is a nice 4-star pickup as a transfer guy, plays in the spring, doesn't see a single carry in the fall, and then transfers out after that. Where you don't necessarily want somebody in that mold of, all right, we're just taking a whole bunch of bodies along the offensive line. We're going to use scholarships on these guys. And then, oh yeah, they're what we thought we were. They're serviceable bodies that might not start here, might not even be a part of the rotation, but we needed to take a body to take a body. Where that's not a sustainable way to build a roster, where you might as well just wait, because we all know the way that the college football portal, just the transfer portal and the college football world as a whole really work now, where it's, all right, you hear rumors that, hey, this guy might be unhappy. This guy might be looking for a new landing spot, where that's going around all the time now, where it's probably almost even safer, truly, to wait it out and just say, once April comes around, we're going to clean up all these guys.
Yep, and I think that's kind of the reason why I just wanted you to lay that out, was because when going back to Jedd Fisch's press conference, where he said, I want to use the free agency like the transfer portal just to kind of sprinkle in some guys. You're not going to go and get, a dozen or so transfers just to say, hey, we need to make this work for spring camp. We might sign some mid-years, right? We might sign some early enrollee freshmen that were under the radar that happened to work out, kind of almost like I believe Devon
like
Banks,
the Parkers.
Right, or the Parkers, right, where it's like, hey, a late last-minute addition sort of thing that you can still get. Now, I think the Parkers came in June, so maybe
but they didn't come on their visit till January and signed in February, which is because Devon Banks was in a similar mold where I believe he signed committed in like January or February and then wasn't able to show up till over the summer. So I feel that those are very similar comparisons.
Right. And so kind of just getting guys and they all ended up, except for Armand, because we just haven't seen him play. So he's still the TBD one, but both Javon and Devon proved that, hey, you can find a pretty quality last minute addition. So I think and I would trust Jedd Fisch's evaluation and scouting as an NFL guy that knows kind of just where the hidden talent is, that if Washington doesn't add a ton through the portal until after spring camp, if I'm a Washington fan, I'm not concerned because he knows how to build a roster, and he showed that at Arizona.
No, I agree with you there, and I feel like that's a great place to just kind of wrap this one up, because there's just so much roster movement happening every single day. Maybe we'll see something between the time that we finish recording and when our next episode is released. So just make sure whatever's going on in the world of Husky football, that you keep it right here with Locked On Huskies. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. And again, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. And make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode, because we might have some bonus episodes, if we see some big time commits coming here soon in the next couple of weeks or so. And make sure to like the show, leave us a comment down below. If you're audio only, make sure you leave us a 5-star review. It's all really, really helpful. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Friday.